On this week's NFV SDN Reality Check, we'll take a look back at last week's Mobile World Congress event with PwC's Dan Hayes, as well as dig deeper into ETSI's NFV Phase 2 work.
Telecom Careers, the #1 global telecom and wireless job board, telecomcareers.com.
Thank you for joining us this week on NFV SDN Reality Check. I'm your host, Dan Meyer, Editor-in-Chief of RCR Wireless News. The annual Mobile World Congress event played out last week with the wireless telecom world focused on Barcelona for the latest in industry news. Joining me today to discuss some of the bigger announcements from the show is Dan Hayes, Principal and U.S. Mobile Services Advisory Leader at consultant firm PwC. Dan, thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, Dan, thanks a lot. Glad to be here.
Great. Well, hopefully you've decompressed a bit from the events from last week. Obviously, it seems like the show has gotten bigger and bigger. I think you mentioned earlier, we're talking off screen here, the fact that it's the show is definitely bigger than it was last year. So obviously the telecom world has not slowed down much at all.
Yeah, well, I think they reported this year something like 93,000 of our closest friends all in one convention center. So yeah, it was a great time, and it really is an exciting event that brings the whole industry together.
Yeah, well, I guess looking at the show this year, so I mean, what, to you, looking at, I guess, the big picture of things, what was maybe some of the big announcements that you saw from the show, some of the big trends you saw coming from the event this year?
Yeah, well, I think in the NFV and SDN world, there was definitely a lot of talk, and I know that many of our clients that we met with at Mobile World Congress were really focused on looking at the value proposition for NFV and SDN. The question that we heard over and over was, how do I make the business case work? What's the value proposition and the financials that are going to make NFV a reality, for the mobile operator? And the answer is that for every operator, it's going to be a little bit different. In some ways, it depends what environment they are, where they're in their life cycle, and what they want to do with it. So it starts with a strategy, and then it's going to have to translate into the business case. But we're seeing a lot of activity, and interestingly, some of the operators that are right here in the United States are really being viewed as being on the bleeding edge when it comes to NFV. And so I think there's going to be a lot of focus on what happens over the next 1 to 2 years and what we do right here in the U.S.
Interesting. And I mean, I guess obviously that business case model, I mean, I know I've talked to a lot of the operators, a lot of other analysts on the topic, and that seems like that is still kind of that big challenge, is trying to make the numbers work on this. Has progress been made, do you think, along these lines, or is it still a work in progress until you kind of get the numbers quite right, where there's a bigger push for this?
Yeah, I think it's very much a work in progress. While there's a lot of interest, and even I would dare say a degree of commitment from many of the operators, they're still trying to figure out the scale and the scope of how they're going to apply NFV, how deeply in the network it goes. In most cases, the operators just are having trouble seeing the feasibility of a rip and replace type of mentality, right? The economics for those things just so rarely work. And so what you're hearing from the operators is, what's the right timing? What's the way that I can get NFV into my network? Maybe it's in conjunction with a network upgrade or an increase in capacity. I do it as part of my capital plan. And they're really starting to look at, how do I offset potentially some of the other investments that I make?
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe, and I know 5G is still kind of out there a bit, but it does seem like perhaps timing-wise, maybe the 5G move and NFV move can maybe come together at some point, and that could be maybe one of those little entry points for it. But yeah, it does seem like that's still kind of, like you said, that rip and replace model, that scares operators, and that's a huge investment. They get a lot of equipment out there. So
yeah, and the question for mobile operators is, 5G too far away, and do they want to take advantage of NFV before then? Yeah. I think that's what they're really wrestling with.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear you say the fact that it does seem like the U.S. is still kind of at the leading edge of this, because I mean, obviously, in the whole LTE move, the U.S. kind of took a leadership position. The U.S. and to extent Asia, really above Europe, and kind of pushing that out there. And I know Europe is still perhaps a bit smarting from the fact that they were perhaps left a little bit behind there. And now they're pushing 5G, but it seems like this virtualization move, again, the U.S. being at the forefront. Interesting to hear that. That's kind of the view around the world, really, too.
Yeah, and we did see some European operators with announcements in Barcelona, talking about NFV. But I think they still, even in talking with some of them, they still view the U.S. as being out ahead, in many regards.
Interesting, interesting. Well, I guess maybe taking a step back and looking at the show, a bigger picture at the show. What else did you see that came from the event? And obviously, you were there. I know you covered that thing pretty exhaustively. I don't want to let you go without getting your bigger picture view of the show as well. But what else did you see at the event that kind of maybe caught your attention, or you thought that was really kind of maybe some of the bigger trends coming from the telecom market?
Yeah, it was an exciting show in many ways, and I think that some of the bigger things that came out were probably the ones that traditionally don't get a lot of coverage. You know, Mobile World Congress 2015 was actually quite unexciting when it comes to mobile devices. That's been the hallmark for many years of the show, but when you look at it, not a lot of real hardcore innovation there. There were some interesting things. My favorite perhaps was the circular device that was debuted, a circular mobile phone,
Oh yeah.
kind of akin to a pocket watch. I thought that was pretty clever. Not sure whether I would use one or not, but I get it. Um, but there were some pretty interesting moves there. One of the things that I thought was really interesting was how focused the event was on unlicensed spectrum in general. This industry forever and a day has been very focused on licensed, owned, and controlled spectrum. But this year at Mobile World Congress, we saw a tremendous focus on unlicensed, and that included Wi-Fi, which of course has been around for a long time, but is getting some increased attention from operators. And then perhaps most interestingly, it included LTE unlicensed, which was a huge focus for the event. And I think is for the first time, being looked at seriously by the industry as a lever for how they can really take advantage of unlicensed spectrum, maybe reduce their capital requirements, but use that to increase capacity and coverage across the industry. That was really fascinating, and you even see some of the over-the-top players starting to talk about that very topic. In addition to spectrum, I guess the other thing that was widely talked about, particularly in light of some of the deals that have gone on the last couple of months, was mobile payments.
Uh-huh.
And that's been something that, of course, people have talked about for years in Barcelona, about how this was going to be the future. But I think some of the announcements that were there, some of the new offerings, really make mobile payments much more of a reality.
Mhm.
And now I think for the first time in the industry, we're really past the question of, okay, what will be the technical solutions for mobile payments? And now it's going to be really all about consumer adoption.
Mhm.
Will people really use them at the point of sale? And can we stop carrying our wallets around, right? I mean, that's the panacea for all of us, right? Just carry my mobile phone and be able to do everything with it. That was really exciting. And then I guess the last thing that I would say for Mobile World Congress in terms of interesting topics was a lot of talk this year about the relationships between the operators and the over-the-top players,
Mhm.
and what that means in terms of going forward, business models, revenue, and collaboration to increase the penetration of mobile.
Mhm.
We take advantage of or sort of assume that everyone has a smartphone at this point, but half the world, more than half the world, still doesn't.
Sure.
And I think the message from the over the top community in Barcelona, and they had a big presence, was really, we want to help create the models that are going to increase adoption of mobile data and smartphones around the world. And it's good to see that part of the industry really being a bit more vocal and having more presence there, even though there are still probably more unanswered questions than there are answers.
Yeah, and that's a great part of that show. I think it's been a couple years since I've been to the show, but I've gone there quite a few times in the past. But it's always great to get that international perspective because again, the attendees are from India, they're from Africa, they're from countries that aren't as developed as perhaps Europe and the U.S. and in parts of Asia. So you do get that insight in the fact that hey, we have a certain view of the fact that yeah, everybody has a smartphone here, but you're right, half the world, people are still got their basic Nokia phones, and that's kind of that's still out there. So you do have to. That's a huge market. There's 3 or 4 billion people that it's still a huge market to go after that you have to kind of hopefully bring along the process. So it is good to get that insight, the different perspective. And obviously, I think you see it a lot more than I do on a daily basis. But to get that perspective on things is probably it's a great part of the show. I think is always to get that international angle on things as well. So it's nice to get that there.
Yeah, and and in particularly in those emerging markets, it's also really critical that they have access to new and lower cost types of services and types of players. They don't always have the same types of devices, the same manufacturers, and you see a lot of movement from the Asian manufacturers, for example, to bring those devices into those markets, that we haven't seen in the past.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And obviously, I think at least domestically looking outside is I know I think Wheeler, FCC Chairman Wheeler was there as well on his net neutrality tour. I think you can call it, trying to convince everybody that that whatever happened here in the U.S. is still a good thing. But I'm sure they got a lot of attention as well at the event. But
Yep.
I know at least in the D.C. area, that's a big topic of discussion as well.
Oh, certainly, yeah. Yeah, and I think around the world, people are looking at what the U.S. is doing with net neutrality as a future indicator for the mobile space as well.
Yeah. Well, it'll definitely be one of those topics we're going to cover here for quite a bit longer. But hey, Dan, we definitely appreciate the great insight. Thanks again for catching up with us on what happened at the show. I know we talked before the show. I think we talked during the show, and now after the show. I think we had a pretty exhaustive view of the show. For those of us who didn't go, I think we can feel like we were actually there this year. So we definitely appreciate the insight on that. Thanks again for taking the time to speak with us today on the topic.
Always a pleasure.
Great. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it again. And again, for more news on the Mobile World Congress event, please check out the RCR Wireless News website, as well as the RCR TV site, where we have literally hundreds of videos, interviews, and demonstrations from the show. Again, thanks again, Dan, for the time. Appreciate it. All right. Well, on our next topic here, I recently had the chance to speak with Diego Lopez, who is the technical manager of ETSI's NFV program, as well as head of technology exploration at Telefonica, about ETSI's work in the NFV space. Lopez talked about ETSI's latest push into phase 2 of its work, as well as the challenges ETSI has tackled in unifying interest behind NFV.
Well, it has been interesting times. we were trying to define rules. Well, for sure, ETSI was helping us because ETSI has a very well established set of rules, but on the other hand, we were trying to force or to stretch those rules a little bit beyond, because we wanted to be rather dynamic. Standards bodies are very often criticized to be slow, moving at a very slow pace, being too formal, getting stuck with the formalisms, and we wanted to avoid that.
Yeah.
Because we wanted to make this a quick and strong impact on the industry. And it was curious because we were at the same time trying to follow the rules, but at the same time inventing new ones, and working very hard with the people from ETSI that were extremely helpful to us in finding new mechanisms that were in spirit as formal as the formal rules, but in practice they were much more agile. And this is something that we found extremely useful for us, because it helped us in moving fast, but without losing losing to have our feet on the ground. So we were in connection with reality, and that you have to follow a reasonably open and careful process, because at the end, otherwise, it's just what a bunch of friends have written on a paper, and we wanted to make something much with much higher relevance in that sense.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess that's a key thing, because it does seem like when it comes to the virtualized world, at least as it comes from the IT or perhaps the data center space, is that it was a much more malleable type of environment there. There weren't like a set of standards that people had to follow. I mean, obviously in the telecom space, as you know from your other job as well, that in the telecom space, I mean, standards are key. I mean, 3GPP sets out standards, and these things are there, and you have to follow them, or there's no interoperability and things like that. It seems like, at least in the virtualized world, that there can be perhaps a little bit more on-the-fly adjustments that can be made. And so perhaps that did, like you said, did seem like it made it perhaps easier for you guys to maybe not set things in stone, perhaps, because again, these things can be a little more adjustable on the go.
Yeah, well, when you think about the virtualized world, in the virtualized world, things are more adjustable because you have standards for doing so. I mean, if you think, for example, all the virtual machines that you're moving around are based on essentially the description of the virtual machines is made using OVF, mostly standard. The point is that, yes, it's true that probably you can deploy some adapter in the middle if you need to do something, but at the end you have to rely as well in some rules that guarantee you that you can move from one provider to another provider. And apart from that, at the end, if what you want to deploy is precisely communicating systems, and you want to guarantee that they are communicating systems that are able to provide a worldwide service in an open way, and you are not allowed, because this is something that is probably the curse and the blessing, somebody says, of the telco world, is that we are not one band company, one man bands.
Yes.
It's not that I have my systems talking to my internal databases, providing my users identify with my directory, and that I connect using my messaging, my integrated whatever. My problem is that I have to connect with the people that are competing with us in our countries, in my footprint, and worldwide.
Yeah.
And I had to allow my users to migrate depending on the country, that depends about even in the orders of hours, to say, I don't want to be with you any longer, and move to another competitor. And I had to allow them to migrate in terms of hours. I guess, I'd love to see that happening in what is called the so modern internet service. I mean, I don't know, but if I wanted to move everything I have in Facebook to Google Plus, for example, how long would it take?
Yeah.
Why? Well, essentially because we are obliged to use standards. They are not, because they have everything is a single monolithic service, or the other way around. Is take it or leave it. I mean, this is my API. You don't like it, forget about it. This is the situation. So we are in that position, right? And we have to somehow reconcile both worlds, on the virtualization, this agile, plug and play, and APIs-like approach when it deals with internals, but connecting and attaching everything like this with external standards interfaces.
Well, I mean, I guess so. How is that progress coming along? Because again, it does seem like that, at least from a standards issue, I mean, you guys are doing a lot of work, but it seems like the vendor community and the market itself is really driving. I mean, operators are announcing that they want to have NFV in their networks pretty rapidly here, but it still seems like there is this kind of, that the things are still not quite set in stone to make this work right. I mean, is that the ongoing challenge for not just ETSI, but for the whole industry, is to make sure that, that obviously you want to have progress, but you have to make sure that that this is smart progress, not just throwing stuff out there and hoping you can fix it later.
No, here there's something that when we started all this NFV, something that we used to show was precisely a diagram of how we saw the innovation cycle in the telco world. It was about you originally came with an idea, you then go to a standards body, you fight for 3, 4, 5 years discussing about the standardization, and then you could start implementation. And then you go for conformance testing, and then interoperability testing, and then you can deploy. That normally we're talking about cycles in the best case 5 years, in the normal case of 8 years. And this is something that we were aware we afford any longer. And as I said before, that we were setting the rules and we were using them. In this case, it's a little bit the same. I mean, we have been trying to explore new ways of achieving these innovation cycles inside the industry, exercising them at the same time. And precisely these POCs and this way of collaborating, of setting a very tight schedule to produce the principles, in a very direct collaboration between vendors and operators. Well, I would say this approach has paid. And this is something that right now, frankly, I would not say that we still have at hand either 100% perfect products to provide this, like probably the ones that were available for the radio deployments when we start with 3G or something like that. And that I would not say that services that have been announced by many operators, among them ourselves, yeah, are 100% in agreement with all the principles, because we have been, as I said, learning about the new innovation process that we were inventing it. On the other hand, we are very glad that we managed to do what you mentioned, precisely in 2 years' time to have a bloom of announcements, products, services, pilots, etc.
Yeah, it's been impressive to watch. I mean, obviously, the past 2 years, like you said, have been amazing in the rapid uptake and the rapid announcements that come from the NFV space. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, this was not even a topic, at least broadly discussed, and now it seems like it's just come out of nowhere. Operators are announcing, vendors are announcing. You guys are moving quickly at ETSI. It's been impressive to watch, and like you said, though, it is we're probably not quite there 100% yet, but obviously it seems like the market is moving at least in the right direction for the most part.
Yeah, and well, I must confess that in that respect, you feel like changing a little bit the world, and this is really, really rewarding,
Sure,
and
yeah.
And as I said, what something that I try to insist very much is that maybe that in 5-10 years time we will be looking at how the common network infrastructure practice will evolve, and probably things will not be as we imagine them right now. But I think that the advent of NFV will imply a real breakthrough in the process, mostly in shortening this process that it was so lengthy and so well, it was somehow ossified in the sense that everybody was used to this. Well, has been and still happens. All this has to bring a strong cultural change, not only inside operators, inside vendors as well, inside integrators, because all of us are used to long innovation cycles, long life cycle of a certain technology, long periods of testing, deployments, exploitation, and re-engineering, deployments again. And well, this is going to change, and we have to get used to much shorter cycles.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, again, I know there's a lot of talk outside or inside the industry about, the move to 5G, for instance. And it seems like, we just got the 4G and already we're talking about 5G. And the timeline there seems like it's shorter than it was from 3G to 4G. But again, when you look at the new world of virtualization, perhaps virtualization can allow that more rapid time frame for things to evolve. I mean, obviously, it's a little bit different world, but it seems like things are moving a little quicker at least.
Well, definitely. I mean, I'm involved in the European initiative for 5G as well. Essentially because, well, this year in Europe, we have managed to convince the people who were supporting this initiative that virtualization was an essential component of 5G as well. That 5G is not only, for sure, 5G is about a new mobile network, and a new, well, not mobile, a new pervasive network, fully pervasive network. But we believe that to do so, the infrastructure must be heavily relying on virtualization on software principles.
Yeah.
And this is something that for sure will be.
Great insight there from Diego on ETSI's NFV phase 2 work. Even more so considering that Diego was fighting a wicked cold at the time, but he did a really great job with that. And for more on the interview, including background on ETSI's NFV phase 1 work, check out the RCR TV site as well. Well, that'll do it for this week's NFV SDN Reality Check. I again want to thank my guest for the show today, Dan Hayes from PwC, for joining us live, as well as Diego Lopez for providing us a great insight into the NFV space. And also thank our Austin crew for putting this all together. Another great job by you guys. And again, make sure you guys check us out again next week for the next edition of NFV SDN Reality Check. Thanks.